Hi, Leah. Nice to see you. Welcome, everybody. So grateful that you're here. Yay. Hi, Bill. Nice to see you.
Hi.
We are excited today to have local celebrity, Wendy O'Leary. Wendy is a Worcester author. She's written 2 children's books. Breathing Makes It Better. What's this? Monster Parade? And Monster Parade. I love that. So it's really exciting. Like, we're here right before she makes it so big. You guys are going to be able to say, like, we saw her on a Trauma Train Tuesday before she was a national celebrity. And Wendy's going to talk about one of the things that's most challenging in trauma, which is managing your emotions. All of us that have experienced some difficult things, where it shows up is in our feelings. Oh, yay, Heidi Sue's here. And it can be so hard to manage feelings. That's been one of I thought about inviting Wendy when I heard from the Boys and Girls Club that they were seeing parents that were just so irritable and angry and just struggling themselves, that they were, worried about the kids, and even the staff were feeling a little unsafe with people's emotions getting bigger and bigger and seeming to not be able to kind of pull it in. Wendy's main space is early childhood. She does a lot of work with the littlest, but also shares our understanding and recognition that if you want to help kids, you got to help their parents and their caretakers. Bradley, hi. So she's going to offer both things to help young people and to help ourselves. And she has a lot of content, she said, so I'm going to just try to zip it right away and turn it over to her. And we of course always love it when people introduce themselves in the chat. And then I'm going to turn it over to Wendy for more instructions.
Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk with you all. And just to say, so yes, I have the 2 books, Breathing Makes It Better and The Monster Parade, which focus on little ones. So preschool through 8, even 10, although I've been told by adults that the books are super helpful for them as well. That said, actually, my work actually spans. I actually teach mindfulness to adults as well. So my work really spans from the littlest ones. I've worked in, all age ranges and all levels of schools and nonprofits, working with all the different ages, as well as working with adults. So today I am going to sort of do that parallel track of talking about how we support ourselves in the midst of difficulties. And as we do that, how we can also support the children in our lives. So I am going to share my screen, and I am going to also apologize for my, for my tech, for some of my tech struggles as I look for my slideshow here. There it is. I thought I had it up. There we go. All right. So I'm going to be talking a little bit today about dysregulation and the use of mindfulness in dealing with trauma. So I am going to, sorry about that. I did mention my tech issues, right? So let me just move this and get to the slideshow. Here we go. All right. There we go. So dysregulation and the use of mindfulness in trauma. So just to let people know, and you've already seen my tech struggles. So today I am really going to just let you know that as a meditation teacher, I really am sort of a single tasker. And so with that, I am not really going to be looking at the chat. So you're free to comment, and please do introduce yourselves, but please don't be offended if I don't kind of look over at the chat. I really want to be focused on you, those of you I can see, and on what I'm presenting. And I will leave time for questions at the end. I want to be sure we have that opportunity. And if I don't get to your questions, always know that you can reach out to me and I will get back to you. I will respond, and I'll be sharing my email at the end of the presentation. I want to also just let people know in advance that we will be practicing. And I think I saw somebody before I moved to share screen say that they were in their car. So obviously if you can't practice, wonderful. And I hope you can listen again later. But it's really helpful to practice as we start to learn these skills, because they aren't just conceptual ideas, right? They're practices that have to do with how we experience our moment by moment lives. So the invitation here is to just play with the practices, kind of a gentle, light touch. And of course, that you're always in choice. So please listen to what's best for you right now in this moment. And so the first practice we're going to be doing is an opening practice. And I'm going to invite you, if it's okay for you right now, to either close your eyes or to glance downward. And there is some visualization in this practice, so if it's comfortable for you to close your eyes, that might be helpful. And just beginning by bringing your attention into your body. Feeling your body seated here, and in particular, drawing the attention to the breath moving in the body, like a wave moves in the ocean. And then I want you to visualize, picture a calm and clear lake. And on the in-breath, you could even say the words to yourself, breathing in, I'm a lake. Breathing out, calm and clear. In, lake. Out, calm and clear. In, lake. Out, calm and clear. And then as you're ready, opening your eyes to end that practice. So we'll be talking a little bit more later about this particular practice and how that fits in particular as we look at this intersection between mindfulness and trauma. Remembering the importance of invitation and choice. So what I'd like to do is to start out by just talking a little bit about our nervous system. And so I know Amy mentioned, right, that with trauma and also just with how we are part of our human nature, right, our nervous system can get activated and our emotions can sometimes be difficult to work with. And for children, that's also the case. So we want to be thinking about how we can support ourselves and children in that, both for those of us who have experienced trauma and also just in general. So it's helpful to understand a little bit first about the nervous system. So I want to talk about, for today, just these two models that sometimes I use when I'm talking about the nervous system. And the first is what we sometimes refer to as the flip the lid brain model. And this model is used by Dan Siegel, who's a neuropsychologist. And basically with this model, and you can use this both to understand for yourself and for children, but also you can actually share this model with children. It's simplistic enough that children can understand this. And so I use my hand to demonstrate this model. And basically we put our hands up and our thumb, we fold our thumb in here, and the thumb in this model is our alarm system. This is our fight, flight, freeze. So it could be referred to often as the limbic system, the amygdala, right? This is the part of the brain. And again, this is a simplistic model, but helpful for our kind of conceptualizing here. This is the part that's in charge of keeping us safe. It takes care of us. So messages come up to the brainstem and they hit this part first. And then wrapped around that is the newer part of the brain, the more evolved part. So this is the part of the brain it's more responsible for higher order thinking, prefrontal cortex, rationalizing, reasoning, prioritizing, all of those kinds of skills. However, what happens is a message comes up through this part of the brain and it hits the limbic system first. And the limbic system it's called a limbic hijack, right? It takes over and it says, uh-oh, there's a problem. Now that could be somebody cutting you out in traffic, or it could be, when I couldn't get my slideshow to show up on the screen, right? Ooh, there's a problem, right? A message goes up, it hits this part of the brain first, and we flip our lid. And if you stop and think for yourself, right, we can all think of times when sort of this is happening in our own system. And certainly we can see that with children. And what's important to know is that when this happens, this part of the brain, the part of the brain that helps us process and understand things and make sense of things, is offline. They can see in MRIs that this part really doesn't light up as it should. So we don't have integrated brain function. And a piece that's important to understand here as it relates to trauma is that often when there's been trauma, this part of the brain is a little more highly active, right? So it can light up more easily and stay lit longer. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, and this will continue throughout our time today. We'll be referring back to this model of the brain. The other thing and the other way that I like to conceptualize it that I find really helpful, both in my own life and when I'm teaching, is this idea of a window of tolerance. And you may have heard of this terminology before, right? That when we are within this window of tolerance, even if we're dealing with stress, anxiety, worry, whatever, fear, upset, anger, whatever we're dealing with, if it's within this window of tolerance, it's manageable, it's workable. However, when it's outside of the window, then we can get overwhelmed and we aren't able to learn. So that's similar to this, right? We're outside of the window of tolerance when this sort of limbic hijack happens. And so we want to be attentive to staying in that window, and ideally, how do we look to expand that window? And you can think for yourself, maybe of children in your life or even of adults and yourself of, some of us have a window we're thrown out of the window a little more easily by certain kinds of things, right? So certain emotions might throw some of us out of the window of tolerance a little more easily. It's really helpful to start to notice what it feels like when we're thrown out of the window and how can we begin to stay in that window and slowly expand it. So again, we'll refer back to this when we look at how mindfulness and trauma intersect. And then the final way I want us to think about the nervous system is just the general idea of understanding, right? We have the sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system, again, this limbic hijack, fight, flight, freeze, right? So this is the part of the brain that's trying to take care of us. When it is activated, the amygdala, that's the part of the brain that lights up, that's going to try and protect us. And this part is offline, as I said. And it's really helpful. And the reason I wanted to share this model in particular is to think about what that might look like. We might know what it feels like for ourselves, but what does that look like, particularly if we're working with children? Fight and flight, or with parents, if we're dealing with parents in programs that we're working in. Fight and flight might look like acting out behavior, anxiety, stress, tension, and the freeze. And I think this is the piece that we sometimes miss as also being a limbic hijack: depression, disengagement, numbness, learned helplessness, right? So those are also places where we want to be sort of paying attention to how we're working with things. And then the other part of our nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system, this part is sometimes referred to as tend and befriend. And when that part is activated, Our prefrontal cortex is back online, right? So we have this integrated brain function, and the hormones and neurotransmitters for positive emotions are released. And with the parasympathetic nervous system, the things that support that and what that might look like: presence, awareness, validation. And we'll again be tying this back into mindfulness shortly: kindness and self-compassion. And so before I go any further, I think it's really important for us to stop for a moment and just acknowledge what's happening right now, right? And so in this moment, particularly for those of us who are dealing with trauma, there's this increased sensitivity, right, to everything that's going on. Things have been really hard for quite some time now. And I know Amy mentioned, the Boys and Girls Club, hearing about, concerns about parents struggling with managing their own emotions. When we've been dealing with things for a long time, right? We might be in the window, and then it's just so much that more and more of us are being thrown out of that window of tolerance. And it's really important at this moment, both for us, particularly if you're caregivers in any way, shape, or form, to really err on the side of lots of kindness and compassion, both to ourselves and to others. And so when I'm talking about mindfulness, it's really important to know that self-compassion practices are also a part of a mindfulness practice. And I know personally, as well as in my teaching, I've really been leaning into practices for self-compassion. And I know Amy shared one of those on Facebook today, so thank you for that. I really think these are such essential practices for us to be working with right now, and I'll be sharing a little bit more about that.
Wendy, do you mind talking about learned helplessness for a quick minute? You had it on the last slide, and I'm not sure that we all know.
Yeah. So a lot of times, and particularly, thanks, Amy. So particularly if we are dealing with a history of trauma, we might have learned that we don't have capacity, right? And there might be that sense of not being able, and so we shut down, right? Does that make sense? So it's that sense of, I can't do anything anyways, boom, shut down. And we want to really understand that shut down is, I think we often misconstrue the sort of activation of the system as only that acting out behavior we see. But some of us act in, right? Some of us go in and take it out internally, or some of us shut down. And so it's really important to kind of tease that out a little bit and to understand that there are ways to support both ourselves and others, regardless of fight, flight, or freeze. Did that clarify, Amy? Thank you. Great. And so I like to frame much of my teaching by using this quote, because I find this quote really helpful. And that is a quote attributed to Jon Kabat-Zinn. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf. And all of us have experienced waves, right? And we will. That is just a part of human existence, right? It's just a part of being human. There will be difficulties to different degrees at different times. And yet, particularly over the past 2 years, it has been pretty turbulent for most, if not all of us. And so I use this quote just as a reminder. And what I talk about mindfulness is that mindfulness can help us to ride those waves. And often for children, we kind of want to get rid of the waves for them, right? There's that kind of, I don't know, some of you have probably heard of helicopter parents, but then there's also the snowplow parents, right? To get out in front and try and clear things away, to fix things. And yet what we really want to be doing is enhancing children's sense of capacity to handle the difficulties, not get rid of the difficulties. And of course, for ourselves, how do we handle and cultivate our own sense of capacity to handle the waves of life instead of thinking we're going to get rid of the waves of life? And so mindfulness is this riding of the waves. And much of what I teach, particularly in a short session, is this idea of riding waves. And yet I do want to say that mindfulness offers something even deeper. And that is the capacity to sort of scuba dive. Let's go down deeper and dive a little deeper and understand a little bit more our habitual ways of being in the world that might not be serving us. And with mindfulness, we can start to work with that as well. When we get real quiet, we can start to really notice our habitual ways of being. But for the most part, we'll be talking about riding the waves. And so what is mindfulness, right? So a little bit about our nervous system. And now what is mindfulness? And I think it's important because there's a lot of mindfulness has kind of gone mainstream now. And so a lot of people talk about it. And I think it's really important that we all have sort of a baseline understanding. We're coming from the same place when we're talking about it. And so mindfulness is often defined as present moment awareness on purpose with a particular attitude. Sometimes teachers will talk about two wings, awareness. And the second wing is this attitude of acceptance, kindness, and interest. How is it that we're relating to those waves, right? We notice the waves. How are we relating to the waves? That's the attitude. And often this awareness piece is referred to as tend. So you might remember that when we talked about the nervous system, the tend piece, tend and befriend, is one of the ways that the parasympathetic nervous system is talked about. And so mindfulness is kind of like a way of our kind of calling in support from that parasympathetic nervous system. And so examples of like why this awareness is important. So just to think in your own lives, because I really think we learn more when we can personalize it. So thinking in your own life, have you ever, I don't know, gotten out of the shower and wondered if you washed the shampoo out of your hair? Or did you remember to lock your door? Or how did you drove somewhere and you don't remember actually how you got there? Or you've read something. Have you ever done this where you've read something, you kind of see a little bit, you're reading a chapter, you finish the page and you think, I have no idea what I just read, right? These are all examples of when we are not present for what we're doing, right? We're not in the moment. And mindfulness is really the opposite of that, being present in the moment. And there is research that says, where are we when we're not present? We're mind wandering. And when we're lost in story, our minds wander, according to research out of Harvard, 47% of the time. And we're less happy when our minds are wandering. So what are we attending to when we're present in the moment? We're attending to what's happening externally, right? What's coming in through our senses. And so, just for a moment now, as I mentioned, we'll integrate practice. So just for a moment now, noticing the sounds that you hear. So we're allowing our attention on purpose, right? The sounds were happening anyways, but now we're paying attention to them, noticing what it feels like when you just really pay attention to something that's happening right now. And so internally, right? So externally, what's coming in through our senses. And then internally, we're paying attention to our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions. And of course, this is really beneficial both for self-awareness, right? We start to notice the thinking mind and where it's pulling us, but also really beneficial for calming and regulation. Because again, of that research, when the mind is wandering, we're usually scanning for problems. And when we're able to kind of calm and regulate, paying attention to what's happening in this moment can help to bring this back online. And now the other aspect is this sense of sort of the attitude. What's the attitude towards which we are noticing our moment by moment experience? And I do want to say that this is just a brief piece of what I'm talking to you about today. And usually just mindfulness is something that I teach in a 6-week session. So little taste of mindfulness. today. And if you want to dive deeper, there's certainly lots of resources to do that, or reach out to me. But this attitude piece, how are we relating to what's happening now? And so I want to try a little experiment with you. So again, if you're able to, because this is a visualization practice as well, if you're able to in the moment and it's comfortable for you to do so, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment. And whatever you do not picture a pink elephant. No pink elephant. And now opening your eyes if they were closed. And so I'm not going to ask in this group. However, when I do this in person, most people will see what? A pink elephant. And they have actually done research on this. And so there is research on this, which does show that by and large, what do we see? A pink elephant. So you may have heard that saying, what you resist persists. For sure, right? And so to the degree that we are resisting our present moment experience, this can't be happening, right? Or, I can't believe I have to do that, right? There's that push back. That resistance actually amplifies the problem. So an analogy that I sometimes use is if you have one of those big beach balls and you push it down in the water, the harder you push it down, what happens? Boom, it pops back up somewhere, usually unexpectedly. So displaced anger is a great example of this. We resist, or if you've ever had problems sleeping, I don't know, I find that whenever I share this with people, almost everyone has had at least some difficulty sleeping at some point in time. If you've ever had a hard time sleeping, or you woke up in the middle of the night, couldn't get back to sleep, and you said to yourself, I have to be asleep. I can't be awake right now. Does that help? Right? The more we resist the fact that we're awake, the more the mind starts spinning. Oh my gosh, I have too much to do tomorrow. I can't be awake, right? We kind of amplify the problem. And so we want to start to just cultivate this capacity to be curious and interested in our moment by moment experience. And I know when I do sessions that are solely on mindfulness, I will often have people talk about this acceptance and ask. And so I'm going to sort of front end this question. People will say, well, acceptance, isn't that really being passive about things? And what I would say to that is that no, this isn't about a passively just sort of submitting to, okay, I can't do anything about this. It's an acceptance that this is what's happening in the moment because this is what's happening in the moment. And it allows you to land where you are to be able to make a choice in how to move forward. It gives us actually more capacity for choice and ability to move forward. Almost like if you were trying to get traction on ice, you kind of need to land where you are first so that you can take a step forward without sliding all over the place. We need a little traction. And being able to accept the reality of the moment allows us to then decide where to move from there. So not being passive with the sleeping. Yep. My mind is swirling. So we're not moving forward. We're not buying into the whole story of it. Yep. Mind is busy. Body's a little restless. It's just what's happening now, right? So we can sort of do that. And then I also teach adjustment. So an adjustment would be, and then maybe I'm going to take a couple of breaths to try and calm the system a little bit. But first I'm going to land where I am. And so this third A, I sometimes will teach mindfulness as 3 A's: awareness, attitude, adjustment. This third A is making a shift. How do we sort of make a shift and change what's happening in the moment? And we can make that shift often because, and why it's important to be able to know about this is to just share briefly about the negativity bias. So the negativity bias basically says that because of evolution, our brains are made such that negative experiences stick like Velcro and positive slide out like Teflon. And so we want to be able to sort of notice and shift our attention to notice positive experiences. So if you've ever had a day where you felt like everything was going wrong, right? because of the negativity bias, those negative experiences take on a much broader view. And we want to be able to kind of notice and shift our attention. Yep, this is difficult, and be able to shift and also notice the positive experiences. So the negativity bias is something that we'll kind of get back to in a moment. So let's talk a little bit now about this intersection. Where is it that mindfulness and specifically trauma intersect, and what are the potential benefits of mindfulness, particularly when we're talking about trauma? So mindfulness can be really helpful for regulation and cultivating capacity, right? It gives us a sense of resilience. We start to sort of practice coming back into this window of tolerance. It gives us resilience, and it helps to activate that tend and befriend, the parasympathetic nervous system. So for example, when we're doing this sort of flipping the lid model of the brain, mindfulness can help to bring this part back online. And again, if you remember that for those of us who experience trauma, often this part can be more easily activated, right? There could be that hypervigilance. And so we want to be able to notice and be able to bring this back online. That's part of riding the waves. And one of the ways that I do that, so I'll weave in some things that I share with children as well. One of the ways that I explain this with children is using this calming jar, making sure you can see this, hopefully. So when I use it with children, this one's glass, but if I have children make them, we make them with plastic, we glue the top and tape it so that it stays closed, because they will try and open it. So the mindfulness jar, the calming jar, you'll see on the bottom there are these sprinkles. And basically what I'll say is when our nervous system is activated, when this happens, it can feel like this. And children kind of understand what that feels like. And I think for those of us, like when we say we can't think clearly, this is what's happening, right? The system is activated. And mindfulness, by helping us just let things settle, we can stay still and calm, focusing on, say, our breathing. So I'll shake it up once, and it gives us something to visualize, right? So we're focusing on present moment experience, visually watching it settle, and internally focusing on our breath. So I'm going to shake it up, and we'll follow our breath while we watch it settle. And if you notice that your mind starts to wander, it's totally fine. See if you can redirect the attention back to the calming jar, watching as it settles, following the breath. So I know some people who talk about having snow globes that they use at their desks to help calm the system. Using something to focus on, and often if we weren't over Zoom, I would use the mindfulness bell, because sound is a really strong sensory perception. But what happens when we're focused on something else, often what it will do is give this a little break, right? That internal chatter. And that's what's keeping this activated. Our emotions have this trajectory. They go up, they come down. However, it's our thinking, it's this that is what keeps the jar shaking, right? So something goes wrong. We think, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. What if this happens? Oh, and then tomorrow this will happen, right? And we keep shaking the jar. When we just focus on something present in the moment, it gives us the capacity to let that settle. So the other thing and the other benefit of mindfulness is that it also can start to bring things above the line of consciousness. So whatever is below the line of consciousness, if we're not aware of it, it has a little more power over us, right? We can be a little more reactive to it. And so we want to kind of bring things above the line of consciousness. So for example, an analogy that I like to use is if you're in a house in the dark, you bumping into furniture, right? You go into a room and it's dark and you're bumping into furniture. When we can shine the light, we can see where the furniture is and we can walk around it. And so mindfulness is about shining the light on certain things. So say, for example, you're having lots of thoughts about worry about something, but you're not really paying attention to it. They're kind of quiet thoughts about worry, but it's starting to affect like how you're interacting with people, right? It's affecting what you do, or it's affecting your choices. Maybe you're deciding not to try something new because of that sort of fear of failure and that worry. So we want to start to notice, right? What are the things that are kind of underneath that level of consciousness? As we start to pay attention to our thoughts and emotions, we might start to notice, right? What are our top 10 thoughts? Where are the places that we tend to go with our worry? And that allows us to kind of work with it more skillfully instead of being completely reactive. So for example, somebody hurts your feelings. Some of us, when our feelings get hurt, lash out, right? Reactive, lash out. Some of us, when our feelings get hurt, go inward, right? And maybe beat ourselves up over it, or just get quiet, pull back, don't do things. To the degree we can start to say, oh, hurt feelings. Oh yeah, it doesn't feel good, right? We can start to see that. It helps us to, again, we have a little more choice. We're not just responding in a reactive kind of way. And it's really important to say that mindfulness is so beneficial and can be really helpful in working with the regulation of our emotions and our attention. However, there are also cautions, in particular when it comes to mindfulness and trauma. And I think because mindfulness is sort of thrown out there all the time, people think of it as like now this sort of magic cure-all. And it's really important to say that mindfulness is a practice. So it's not like you're going to go to one session on mindfulness and all that ails vanishes, right? It is a practice, and it's also really important to know when it is and isn't indicated. And so sometimes mindfulness, which is really about being with what is in this moment. And sometimes what is in the moment is really hard. And particularly if we've had an experience of trauma, it can be really dysregulating and it can be triggering. And so sometimes being with what is, mindfulness, can throw us out of that window of tolerance, which is why I really wanted to share about that. David Treleaven is sort of the go-to person for mindfulness and trauma. His work is phenomenal. And I noted his book, Trauma Sensitive Mindfulness. Also, he does workshops and trainings and certification programs on the intersection of mindfulness and trauma. And it's really important to acknowledge this, that mindfulness can throw us out. And when that happens, if we're outside of the window, we aren't learning and growing. It's from in the window that we can expand it, right? Going to those edges of the window, but not getting thrown out. And so it's really important to know that sometimes being with what is not helpful or skillful in the moment. We have coping skills and we have them for a reason. And so we don't want to just rip them away, but start to slowly build capacity, slowly build our ability to be with what is, and modulate that in very slow and conscious ways. And that coming into the body, and mindfulness is an embodied experience. It's an experiential practice and understanding. Coming into the body can be a trigger for people. Again, we want to start to do that slowly. So I always use the word slowly, gently, kindly, to really tread carefully, both with ourselves and with those that we're working with. And to know that sometimes it's important to get additional support in doing that, a trauma sensitive therapist trauma-informed mindfulness coach, something along those lines. It's not one size fits all. It's really important to be flexible, give people lots of options in practice. And because of the experience with trauma, our systems can have some hypervigilance, right? Again, that sensitivity here in that fight, flight, freeze. And so we want to notice that and know that that hypervigilance can incline us to notice trauma triggers when we're practicing even more. And so if that happens, it's really important to have some tools and ways to deal with that. And there are some ways that we can deal with all of these cautions, but I think it's really important to know that there are some definite cautions with mindfulness and trauma. So how do we address them? The first is to make sure we're always in choice, that we always are offering to people that there's choice, and offering to ourselves to be in choice. So I know when I was doing my training in mindful self-compassion, I was in the middle of dealing with some things in my family. And there were things that were pretty activating. And I would go from being in a situation to getting online. It was an online training. And those practices were very heart opening and potentially vulnerable practices. And so sometimes being in choice meant that I just was feeling my feet on the floor, right? And knowing for myself that that was an option to take good care of myself was really important. And so it's important that we all know that, both as the adults and also that we're teaching that there are options and there is choice. In particular, David Trelevin talks about the breath not always being the best anchor, and to know that what works for me might not work for you, right? So for me, breath is a really helpful and supportive anchor. But often, particularly with trauma, breath isn't always the best anchor. And as I mentioned before, the body also can be a little activating. And so there are other options, and we'll be doing a few practices, and I'll share some of those as well. Always validate all experiences, both your own and others, that it's not always calm. Mindfulness is not about just calming. Mindfulness is really about being with what is, with a little bit more capacity, right? Where it's really expanding that window of tolerance. And when we're out of the window, being kind to ourselves in that moment, because we all do this sometimes, all of us. Can we be kind to ourselves in that moment, which will help support us getting back in that window? So always validate experiences. Often when I do a mindfulness practice, when I am working with people over a period of time and I can get feedback on the practice, if no one else says it, I might sometimes say, particularly if I'm doing it in a work environment, closing your eyes and doing a practice might feel kind of awkward and vulnerable. Even if somebody else doesn't say it, I want to make sure that they aren't buying into some predisposed message they got that Wendy was coming to help them learn how to be calm. That whatever they're experiencing is what they're experiencing, and it's about noticing what the experience is in the moment. I always begin, particularly if I'm sensitized to the fact that there is some trauma, I'll begin with practices that support coming into the window, the practices that might be supportive of calming, resourcing. So some of those adjustment practices, and we'll talk about those, and self-compassion. And that's what we'll be practicing a little bit today. And then always meet them, if you're teaching it to someone else or yourself, where you are. Short practices. I often think of it as like sprinkling seeds, right? We're not going to pound those seeds into the ground. We're just going to sprinkle them and maybe put some fertilizer and water them and hope that they spring up. But you want to really meet people where they are. I had this experience with, I was teaching in a classroom, I think it was grade 5. And one of the students was kind of always, sort of looked like he was half like lying down on the table, with his head down a little bit, and didn't really look like he was paying attention or practicing with us, kind of looking away. And I made sure to tell the teacher, do not correct. Like I might say, I invite you to sit up nice and tall, and I'll say things like that. It's an invitation, and I want to meet the child where they are. And it was in fact, that child's parent that reached out a few weeks later to say that this particular young man was using the practice at home, that they were dealing with some difficulties at home, and that he had been using, not at, he was at a place where he couldn't really kind of come fully into the practice in a classroom environment. It was a lot going on. So being with what is was a little too much, but the seed was planted and he was able to take that and use it. So never sort of underestimate the sprinkling of seeds, and know when it is and isn't a good time to practice. Like I said, when I was doing the self-compassion training, feet on the floor is what I did. If it's best for you, right? If you're feeling really activated, and what feels like it's going to be the best skill right now, if I'm leading a practice and it's better for you to run your to-do list in your head, then that's being self-compassionate. Paying attention and listening to your own inner wisdom is really important. And I will share a little bit more specifically about how to address some of these cautions when I work with children as well. But for now, let's do a little bit of practice together. So one of the ways when we're paying attention, as you remember, when I talked about mindfulness being awareness of external, what's happening externally, those are our sensory perceptions, right? Sense-based practices. And so it's really important for us to have the opportunity to practice with some of those. So the first practice that I want to share with you is a practice that I call 3-2-1. There are lots of variations on this, and it's often used in therapeutic settings. It is a great practice to use if somebody is like a little bit out of the window of tolerance or a little dissociative, if they're kind of shut down as well. This can be a really helpful practice. And so for this practice, I'm going to ask you to start by noticing 3 things that you see, 3 specific things. So I see a pencil, you see my bulletin board, and I see a face on my computer screen. And now 2 sounds that you hear. I hear some birds, and I hear some buzzing sound. And now 1 sensation. I can feel my hands touching. So we'll do it one more time. 3 things you see. 2 sounds you hear. And 1 sensation. And again, we're coming right back into the present moment, like right here. And because it's a nice short practice, I am not as concerned about some of the trauma response concerns when we're doing sort of a brief practice. So these can be really helpful to kind of just come into the moment for just a brief period of time, and can calm the nervous system just a little bit, again, quieting this internal kind of conversation and that activation just a bit. We already did a listening practice, and we used, the mindfulness jar, this calming jar, as a visual practice. And child-friendly practices could include, and actually I use this with adults as well, is the mindfulness bell. So I might ring the bell. And again, I don't do it online as much because it can sound, a little tinny, and it's hard for me to regulate and know how much you're all hearing it when I do it online. But the mindfulness bell is a great practice with children because, again, sound is such a strong sensory perception, and it really does kind of quiet and calm the system. And it gives, gives the sort of discursive mind a little break and can be really helpful. Games can be really great with children. So I play the mirror game, that one where you put your hands up, you move around, and you have two people mirroring each other. So that can be a really great game to play. And I already used the calming jar and talked about that for body-based practices. So if you're able to, and depending on where you're sitting, if you can put your feet on the floor, right? So just feeling your feet touching the floor. So sensing sort of connection. You might feel socks or shoes on your feet. You might feel temperature or tingling. Almost like your attention is a flashlight and you're shining that light of attention on your feet on the floor. And so for those of you who are working in organizations where you're walking around a lot, I often will share this one with teachers. You can do that while you're walking. A lot of times we don't practice because we don't have time, right? If you're walking anyways, be there for it, right? Be present while you're walking. Feel your feet on the floor. Walk and know you're walking. So feeling your feet on the floor as you're walking, the practice of feet on the floor, walking, any practices like that can be really beneficial, especially when you're really anxious. If there's a lot of fear and anxiety, it's a grounding practice. You can even add in, sometimes I'll take my hands and palms down on your thighs. If you're sitting, feeling your hands on your thighs. So feet on the floor, hands on the thighs. Can even add in a word. Steady, strong, grounded, connected. So we're supporting our bodies as we activate this parasympathetic nervous system, the part that helps us to feel like, oh, we're safe, we're strong, we've got this. Can be really helpful. Another thing that I do myself throughout the day is I scan my body and then I invite it to soften. So I know for myself that I hold my tension in my shoulders, right? So the minute I'm like planning, thinking, working on something, my shoulders go up just, even after all these years of meditation and yoga, they go up just a little bit. So just that periodically scanning the body for tightness and tension, and an invitation. Again, we're not forcing anything, but I'm going to scan, and then a gentle invitation to just soften. Can I soften just a little more? So you might even scan, right? Your legs, abdomen, chest, shoulders, even your head and your face. And a gentle invitation to soften. Yoga is also a really wonderful body-based practice. So depending on how you do yoga, but if you're practicing yoga and you're really staying connected to that felt sense of the body, being present for what's happening in the body. Sometimes I like to just do small micro movements to notice the difference. So if I'm doing a warrior pose, for those familiar with yoga, and I have my palms down, flipping them up and noticing how that opens up the heart center. So just playing around with different body postures in a yoga practice can be really helpful, and you can find lots of those online. So child-friendly adaptations, lots of children's yoga cards, books, teachings. So yoga with children is a really great one, and always like direct them into the body. What does it feel like in your body when you're doing mountain, or when you're doing volcano pose, or when you're doing, whatever practice they're doing. So really directing them that way. A practice that I really like, and actually I use this as an adult, and I also use it with children, is feet seat. So similar to the feeling the feet on the floor, it can be really helpful to give the mind a little more to do. Right? So the more subtle the practice, the easier it is for the mind to go off into whatever story it's creating. And so if we're able to feel our feet on the floor and also the backs of our legs against the chair or cushion or whatever we're sitting on. So, and going between those. So you can practice that now if you're able to put your feet on the floor, feeling your feet. And now feeling your seat. And feet. And seat. And one more, feet. And seat. And the benefit of a practice like this, and one of the learnings that happens here, is that we have the capacity to move our attention around. We don't have to let our attention get hijacked. But first we need to notice where it is, and then start to cultivate almost like a muscle of attention, working with that flashlight. How do we move it from our feet to our seat? That can be such a great practice. And again, if we have inclination towards scanning for problems, which is the default mode for most of us in the brain, we want to kind of work on resetting that. Can we notice, okay, there's some fear, and can I redirect my attention to notice the beautiful sunset, right? So that's that adjustment that I talked about earlier. And it starts with practicing having the ability to move that attention around. So feet seat is a great way to do that. And if you're working with really little ones, I'll actually even make it more obvious. And when I teach them, I'll say, feel your feet. And when I say the word feel, I'll have them stomp with one foot. And when I say your, I'll have them stomp with the other. So we'll do feel your, and then I'll say feet. And it gives more sensation, makes it easier for them to get pulled down to the feet, the attention to get pulled down there. And then I might say, let's take a breath in and out. And then feel your seat. We might take a breath in and take a breath out. Another practice that I do with children to support, again, this capacity to go from, right, when we're feeling really activated, sometimes there can also be a lot of energy in the body. And so the practice of seeing what it feels like internally to go from movement to stillness can be really beneficial. And one of the ways that I do that, often if I'm in a classroom with children, I'm there for a short period of time and they're already sitting often like on a floor with little ones. So I'll do a practice called rock to stillness. And so I'm going to show that to you now. So basically, and I'll show it to you how I teach it to children. So when I'm teaching it to children, I might say, begin by just rocking side to side. Right? And I'll have them rock back and forth. And then I want you to go just a little slower. And now go just a little slower. And now go so slow. I can hardly see you move. And now let's be completely still. And we'll take 3 breaths. And then I might lead them in a breathing practice, which we'll be doing a few of shortly. I will tell you, when I do the mindfulness bell or rock to stillness, almost always the children's energy, you can feel the energy in the room just drop down. They're really calm. It's really a supportive way for them to see that we want to enhance their ability to see that they can manage their nervous system, right? We want to start to cultivate that skill for them and help them cultivate that skill. So breathing practices are what many people think of first when they think of mindfulness. And I want to be sure to say here that mindfulness is more than all these tools and activities, right? It is a particular way of being with our experience, awareness, present, aware of what's happening, and with a particular attitude, right? A welcoming, curious, interested attitude about our experience. And so when we're working with people, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but when we're working with children and working with ourselves, what we say to ourselves or to those we're working with can also be from the perspective of mindfulness. And that can be really beneficial. But a few of these practices that can sort of support this sort of attitude, way of being, are the ones that we're working on right now. And so breathing practices, we already did a visualization practice, right? We did breathing in, lake, out, calm, and clear. You could do breathing in, mountain, and out, steady and strong. And these practices you can also do with children. And I do use them with children. And in fact, my first book that I wrote with Chris Willard, Breathing Makes It Better, uses nature-based visualization and breathing in that practice that's integrated throughout the story. And particularly for older children and adults, just mindful breathing, right? Breathing and knowing you're breathing. So breathing in, you know you're breathing in, and breathing out, you know that you're breathing out. And it's when we sit for long periods of time doing these breathing practices, particularly mindful breathing, and staying really present with the breath, that we can start to notice what happens around the breath, right? When we anchor with something for a longer period of time, when we do it just for a few breaths, it can help to calm the nervous system. When we really start to work with it, then we start to do that diving deeper, right? We start to notice what are the things that are bubbling up around the breath, what's pulling us away, and we can start to work with that. But for this just riding the waves, to have the capacity, as it says in Breathing Makes It Better, stop and take a breath. It can be as simple as that to help us learn how to calm the nervous system. So we notice that we're feeling a little activated, just stopping and taking a little breath. We're about to go in and have a difficult conversation with a coworker, a friend, or a loved one. Stop and take a breath. I usually actually recommend 3 to 5 when you're doing any practice, sort of one to get into the hang of it, another one to really kind of sink in. And by the time you're doing the third one, if it's your last one, you're already kind of starting to move out. So 3 to 5 breaths can be a really helpful mindful breathing. You're breathing anyways, again, to address this issue of time constraints. We're breathing anyways. Stopping and taking a breath consciously can be a really supportive thing to do. Child-friendly adaptations are really important here because the breath is very subtle. And so it's a little harder to work with for children. And so one of the breathing practices that I like to do with children, I think I have it here, I'll teach them diaphragmatic breathing, which is the breathing that we're born. That's how we're born breathing, right? Where when we breathe in, our bellies expand just a little bit. And when we breathe out, they go in just a little bit. And so when I teach diaphragmatic breathing to children, I call it belly breathing. And I often will use this, what I call the breathing ball. And so I'll use this. It helps me to pace the breathing a little bit, slower, deeper breaths, calm the nervous system. In fact, there are nerves at the base of the lungs that when we breathe deeply and the breath is able to sort of connect with that place in the lungs, it accesses and it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Again, it helps to calm us. So deep breathing can be helpful. And so I will often use the ball and we'll just take, so we'll do 3 belly breaths using the breathing ball. So we'll breathe in, a reminder the belly gets bigger, and out. And one more in and out. And the last one in and out. So it gives the children more to do, right? They have the ball to look at. They're thinking about the belly. So they're paying better attention to what they're doing. It gives the mind a little bit more. It's a little less subtle, which can be really beneficial. And then one that I love doing with little ones is bee breath. And so just to say, anytime our exhale is longer than our inhale, it calms the nervous system. So a longer exhale, and there are countless breathing practices. I mean, so many breathing practices out there. I just picked these two to share with you. But it's really helpful to know that a longer exhale, any practice you see that has a longer exhale, or you make one up that has a longer exhale, that helps to calm the nervous system. And so one of the ones that I like to use, like anytime we blow out through the mouth, it usually extends the exhale in through the nose, out through the mouth. But one of the ones that I love to do with little ones is bee breath. And so when we breathe in through the nose, and then we breathe out, we make a humming sound like bees. So we breathe in. So doing that automatically extends the exhale. So if you're in a space where it's okay for you to do this one, it is really calming for adults as well, because it does extend that exhale, and the humming causes a vibration internally, which is really beneficial and can sort of calm our system as well. So with children, to make it fun, we always want the practice to be fun and playful. We want them to want to understand their internal experience and be curious. Sometimes I'll say to them, we'll do one regular bee breath, and then we'll do one angry bees, and then we'll do one sleepy bees, right? So 3. Or if I do 5, I make sure to end with sleepy, right? So I might bring the system up and then help them come down. So let's do 3. We'll start with calm, then we'll do angry, and then we'll do sleepy. I'm just giving a check on my time. All right, so let's take a breath in. Breathing in. Angry bees. And a sleepy in. And so if you work with children, I want to say, be creative, right? Like somebody made these names up, came up with these ideas. I've made some things up, as long as you have the understanding of the practice, right? So you want to make sure that you're extending the exhale is what you're wanting to do to calm the nervous system. Lots of different activities you could do with this idea of bees and bee breathing. And so now I want to talk a little bit about a couple of practices that fit into this adjustment piece that I was talking about earlier, right? So we're aware of what's happening in the moment. We're, kind of having this interested, curious attitude about it, being present with what's happening. And then we're deciding, right? Like the sleeping thing. Can't sleep. We're noticing it. We're not getting pulled into the story about it. We're just noticing body's energized, mind is buzzing. Okay, that's just what's happening now. Okay, can I be with this? Yeah, okay, I can be with this. And now maybe I'm going to make an adjustment. And again, remembering, because of that negativity bias, how helpful and important that can be. And so these are some of the practices, particularly since the pandemic, that I've really been inclining towards, because I think that we really need to be as supportive of our nervous system as possible. We really need to be helping ourselves focus on some of the good, because so much of the difficulty is sort of right in our faces. So again, it doesn't mean head in the sand. We're not acknowledging, right? Lots of kind acceptance for the difficulties of the moment. And now can we shift to a practice of, so practices around gratitude and well-wishing also support some resourcing. So if we are outside of the window of tolerance, to get back in, we want to be able to give ourselves some resources, right? We want to enhance our capacity. And so some of these practices can help us come back into that window. So we're going to do a little practice of taking in the good. And this is from the work of Dr. Rick Hansen. He has several books, really interesting work, again, on the neuroscience here and how we can work with our brains, work with our minds to support our well-being. And so again, if it works for you today, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. We are going to do again a little bit of visualizing here. So closing your eyes and just first settling in, feeling the body seated here, maybe feeling the breath. And I want you to call to mind a time when you felt peaceful, calm, happy. It doesn't have to be a big thing. With children, sometimes I'll say it doesn't have to be a trip to Disney, right? It just could be looking out at the sunset. For me, sometimes it's watching the birds or having tea with a friend. And really trying to remember it as clearly, get close in, remember it as best as you can. You might notice what you see in that moment. Are there any smells associated with this memory? Tastes? What about sensations? Maybe like the sun on the face or wind. Maybe something comfy that you're sitting on. What sounds do you notice? And then I want you to start to notice, what does it feel like in your body when you're happy or calm, peaceful? How does that feel in the body? You might even invite that sensation to intensify. Soak it in like a sponge soaks in water. You might even tell yourself, oh, this is a keeper. This feeling is a keeper. And the reminder here is that feeling is inside of you. It's not outside. You can access it at any time by calling up this memory or calling up this felt sense, peace or happiness. And then as you're ready, opening your eyes or looking up to close our practice. So there are a few components of taking in the good, and it's so important to remind people that it doesn't have to be a big thing, that it can be something really just someone smiled at you. Because sometimes it can be hard, especially in the midst of difficulties, to access something. So giving some really simple examples can be helpful. So there's a few components that help our brain hold on to a memory of taking in the good, right? We want to let it sink in and get logged in our long-term memory. So the duration, right? We held it for a while. So often we maybe like see a beautiful sunset and we're like, oh, that's beautiful. I have to do this. I should do that, right? We're gone. We're already gone. We want to make sure we hold the felt sense of the experience for at least 3 to 5 breaths. Multisensory, I had you call it up with using different senses. Body-based. The key here is to feel the experience in the body, right? We're embodied beings. We call feelings for a reason, right? We feel them in our body. So what does it feel like in our bodies when we're happy? And then intensity. That was the sort of soaking it in. And then the final piece was intention. Literally telling our brain to hold the memory, right? This is a keeper, helps us to log it in long-term memory. So taking in the good can be, sometimes people do a safe place or a happy place that they can call up, or a person. Sometimes you could do a practice of calling in your people, right? Who are the people who make you feel safe and held and loved? It's really helpful to kind of have some of those practices in your toolbox when you're feeling like you've been thrown out of the window. Can you come back in, recognize it, and use some of these tools? Another practice that I really love, and I like to give a combination of practices that are sort of a little more time consuming, you're sitting, you're formally doing, as well as practices that you can kind of do on the fly. And the stealth wishes is one that's often talked about as sort of a well-wishing practice or a loving kindness practice. And the way that I do this practice is if I'm driving in the car or if I'm going for a walk or I'm doing something, I just kind of look around and I think to myself, may you be happy, right? So we're offering good wishes to other people. May you be happy or may you be joyful. Driving in my car, I see people walking by, I don't know them. May you be happy, may you be happy. I'm at the grocery store. May you be happy, may you be happy. When I go for a walk, I look at the houses. May the people who live there be happy. It is amazing how much that can shift a mindset. Offering a little bit of kindness to others is a great practice. This is like my go-to when I'm just, when you're sort of just feeling low and a little grumpy. When I'm having that sort of mind state, I find that offering stealth wishes can be one of the most helpful practices for me in that moment. And then any kind of gratitude practice is always helpful. And I think there's a lot out there about using gratitude practices. I would say around gratitude practice that it is really helpful to add a little novelty. So if you're doing a journal and you're writing grateful for my family or grateful for, and it's the same thing kind of every day, it can be really helpful to be a little more specific and to add, based on the research, and to add a little bit of novelty. The brain likes novelty. So yeah, the sunset was really beautiful, but it was also really beautiful yesterday. What about the sunset today? Oh, the pinks and the way that it swirled in the sky, whatever you can to come up with sort of that gratitude. And again, it's really more the little things than those big things. So make sure you incline the mind towards taking note of the little things throughout the day. For children, I often will do a gratitude garden, and I actually have, let's see if you can see this here. I have here it is, my gratitude garden. So I'll sometimes either give them a petal or a whole flower, and we'll write the different things they might be grateful for. So I wrote this from a time when I did this practice with children over Zoom. And so candy, sunshine, home, friends, pets, right? So I wrote down the different things they said, and we talked about like, how does it feel in our bodies when we're thinking about those things? When we think about our pets, how do we feel, right? So stopping and kind of taking that in. Happiness soup is another practice that I do. And in fact, I won't go too much into it right now, but it is on I do have a YouTube channel, and I'll share that at the end. And I do have a happiness soup practice there. But basically, I have children call up a memory of a time that they felt really happy. And I did this in like a gymnasium with 20, 30 children, kindergartners once, and I had them throw it into my pot. I brought an actual soup pot, and I stirred it up, and then we smelled it. Remember, when we smell, we breathe in through the nose, and and then we blew on the soup. And when we would blow on it, we'd go out through the mouth. So that exhale is longer than the inhale. Remember from before about calming the nervous system, longer exhale. So we'd smell the soup and take in. So it had a couple of purposes to the practice. So they'd throw their happiness into the soup. I'd stir it up. They'd smell it and take in all the happiness from all their classmates. And then when we blow it off, we'd send it out to all the classmates. Then we sent it out to the whole school. And then we would send it out to the whole neighborhood. And then we'd send it out to everybody, right? So taking it in. And while they're doing it, they're doing also a breathing practice. So it's a well-wishing and a breathing practice. And so the final group that I really want to talk a bit about is self-compassion practices. And again, of all the practices I think that I've done over the past 2 years since the pandemic, I would say the self-compassion practices personally have really been the most meaningful and have been so supportive regardless. Other practices are really helpful at different times, but all the time, self-compassion works. Like when all else fails, incline towards self-compassion. And so just a brief definition of self-compassion, right? It's quite simply just treating ourselves like a kind friend, right? How would we treat a friend in this moment? And there are 3 components that are taught, and this is based on the work of Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, who designed the Mindful Self-Compassion program and started the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. And these 3 components are mindfulness, which we've been talking about. So the first is this idea of mindfulness. We need to be aware that they're suffering. The second, or difficulty, the second is common humanity. That understanding that there are waves for all of us. Everybody's going to experience difficulty. Just like everyone else, sometimes I mess up. Just like everyone else, sometimes things don't go the way I want them to. Just like everyone else, sometimes I deal with, some physical struggles. Just like everyone else, sometimes I get angry, right? So can we integrate that idea of common humanity? Often when we're dealing with something difficult, we isolate. And so this common humanity piece helps us to kind of be more inclusive. So important when we're talking about, again, this intersection of mindfulness and trauma. And then the third piece is the self-kindness. Then can we offer ourselves some kindness and some compassion? And so the practice that I know Amy shared over Facebook, I encourage you to take a look at that. I won't do that practice again since she offered it there, but it is called the self-compassion break, and it has those 3 components integrated into it, right? So mindfulness, this is hard, or, right now I'm having a hard time with this. Whatever words resonate. The second piece, just like everyone else, whatever the situation is. And can I be kind to myself? And just to say, that could be saying to yourself, what do you need right now? Oh, I need a cup of tea. Or, you know what, right now, I need to talk to a friend. Or can I simply be saying to myself, you know what, you've got this. It's okay. We've got this. Really offering that to yourself, that sense of support. So we're really internalizing that befriend piece. Tend and befriend. This is hard. Yep, it's okay. I'm here for you. We've got this, right? So how do we offer that kindness to ourselves? And so we are going to do another practice. So the self-compassion break is the one that Amy shared on Facebook. It's also on my YouTube. And we're going to be doing a practice called One for Me and One for You, because I believe most of you work with others, and might be working with children in particular. But even if you aren't, we all know other people who are struggling in this moment, right? Even if it's on the news, we're seeing difficulty all around us. And we want to support our own capacity to be with that in a kind and a loving way. And so we're going to be doing that practice. But before we do, I just want to quickly talk about this idea of mindfulness in any moment of daily life. So practice of mindfulness could be, when I pick up my cup of tea, I can feel the cup, right? I'm really here for it. Even as I'm talking to you, right? I can feel the cup. Can I wash the dishes? One of the practices I've been doing recently is washing the dishes and really feeling the soap, noticing how often we're doing things to get them done. Can I really instead be present for it? Can I feel the dishes? Can I take a few bites of my food? Anything we do can be done mindfully. And so I just want to make sure to say that, and also to say that, again, mindfulness is about how we relate to our moment by moment experience. And if we're working with children, supporting mindfulness might be how we relate to their moment by moment experience. And so it's really important to remember we're not trying to get rid of their feelings. We're not, all feelings are welcome. We're not trying to get rid of their feelings. We're not trying to sort of stop them from feeling what they're feeling, or even to say any feelings are good or bad. We're just trying to give them more capacity to handle their feelings effectively, not get pulled into the parade, as the Monster Parade book talks about. And so it could be as simple as a child's really acting out and struggling, and you say, I know you're really angry, right? So there's that acknowledgement, that clear seeing of what's happening. I know you're really angry. And how about we sit together and do a few mindful breaths? And I say this because so often I will hear and see people who have learned a little bit about mindfulness, or have heard everybody say, oh, just take a breath, right? And might say to a child, and in fact, even with my book, Breathing Makes It Better, I remember having a parent who hadn't read the book yet say to me that they had the book at their house, and that her two children were fighting. And she said to them, hey, breathing makes it better. Stop and breathe. That's not the intention of the practice, right? I can see that you're really angry and upset. I wonder if, right, choice, option, trauma or no trauma, everyone wants their experience to be validated and not to be sort of shut down in that way. And so we're not trying to say, hey, don't feel angry, don't do this. We're going to do this instead. No, we're going to offer it as an offering to help them learn how to cultivate capacity, cultivate their ability to be with their feelings in a kind and loving way. And so it's really important to think about, again, not just sharing techniques and practices with children, but how are you relating to the children as they are dysregulated, if they're dysregulated, or to the parents if they're dysregulated. Yeah, this is really hard. And I'm wondering if it might be supportive if we sit together and do whatever practice. Or as children learn some practices, it's even more supportive to sometimes say, I'm wondering what might help right now so that that feeling isn't in charge. Is there something we could do to help you so that that feeling isn't in charge? And if they don't have ideas, then you can start offering some tools and tips. So we are going to do this mindful self-compassion practice, but I think I'm going to hold it for the end, and maybe we'll end with this. So I just want to quickly talk about a couple more things, and that is tips and practices for children. So when we're talking to children, again, and some of this we talked about when we talked about how to address the cautions. But again, I have to stress, meet them where they are. So if you're sharing it in a group setting with children, or even one-on-one, please don't correct the children. Remember, they're accessing the practice as and if they're able. And so being really, really gentle around it. We are sprinkling seeds. It's a gentle offering. It's an offering. So you never want to sort of force practice, and you want to always give some options. With eyes closed, you may notice I always said if you are able to, and of course I know everybody's in their own space, so they may or may not be able to close eyes. I always give the option, eyes closed, looking down. And often I will have children like staring at me, even after I say that. Totally fine. I always let them know when I'm in an actual classroom or group setting that I will keep my eyes open, as will their teacher, to keep an eye on the space. We want to make sure we're creating that safety around them. And still, many of them are going to look at me and I smile at them, right? That's all. No correcting. They're meeting the practice where they're able. So a really light touch, following their lead. And again, it's more than just practice. We're building some skills. And then you want to make it, having nothing to do with the trauma part, but in general, working with children, we want to make it fun. And so one of the things that I remember when my daughter was younger, she got into trouble at school. And my daughter was a rule follower. And she got into trouble at school and she came home. She was so upset. And she said, I got a head down and I had to count to 10. Like it was a bad thing. And unfortunately, we've taken some of these tools and skills and have turned them into disciplinary techniques. That's not the intention. And we want to be really careful here. I had a teacher who said to me, oh yeah, I have a bell like that. I whack it when the kids are out of control and tell them to settle down. A totally different way. So you want to really pay attention to your intention in sharing practice and how you approach it with children. It's heartbreaking that counting to 10 and following your breath for 10 counts can be so helpful and beneficial. And yet many of us, particularly I think in my generation, like count to 10 was sort of like felt like a disciplinary approach. So we want to really be cautious around that. And then I do want to just share really briefly, I do have a new book, The Monster Parade, and I'm not even going to go into it because it's a little bit more in depth and it does really get more close to gently moving towards feelings, right? So we've learned these skills for riding the waves, calming the nervous system. And yet the Monster Parade is really about, okay, now how do we relate to all these feelings that are marching by? And so the key messages here, they come and go. We are not our feelings. Everybody has them. I always say to the kids, the grown-ups in the room have feelings too, all the same ones. We have the same monsters in our parade, and they're there for a reason, right? They're informative. Feelings are informative. They just don't have to be in charge. We don't have to get pulled into the parade. And there are things you can do to develop the ability to have your feelings without your feelings having you. Right. So we want to kind of give them some of those skills. And I will say that I did an article that I posted, that I wrote, just was posted in mindful.org, sharing about using this practice for adults. I do everything. I practice with everything I share with children. I use all the same tools and skills. I use the Monster Parade all the time in my own practice. And it is up on my YouTube as well, a guided practice for adults on how to work with hard feelings. How do we relate to these feelings? How do we get to know our feelings just a little bit better? And so I'm going to close with a practice, and then I'll open it up for questions. So it's a lot of talking, so I wanted to let people sort of settle in for the end of our time together. And again, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes if that works for you, or looking down. Just settling into the body. Feeling your body here in this moment. You might notice the breath moving in the body. Sensing the felt sense of the breath. And remembering you're always in choice. So if it works better for you in this moment to bring your attention to the feet on the floor or your to-do list, doing it consciously, knowing you're making that choice, because that's the way to be kindest to yourself in this moment. Now I want you to bring to mind someone you know who maybe is having a little bit of a hard time. So don't go to the most difficult situation you might be dealing with, but something that's sort of workable for you to sort of learn this practice today. get a feel for it. Just picturing that person and the situation they're dealing with. And now I want you to turn inward to yourself. When someone we know is having a hard time, it affects us. Even if we don't know someone who's having a hard time, when we see people struggling, it affects us. So I want you to think for a moment of what would best support you in being present for that person. What do you need to deal with that situation? So it could be strength, compassion, presence, equanimity, balance, calm. You don't have to land on the perfect word, but just thinking and finding a word, even if it's compassion, a word that supports you. And on the in-breath, I want you to take that in. So breathing in, calm, compassion, strength. And on the exhale, just simply releasing. Breathing in, taking whatever you need. And releasing and softening on the exhale. Allowing yourself to be filled with whatever it is that most supports you in the moment. Taking that in on the in-breath and releasing on the out-breath. And now, bringing that person back to mind, and only if it feels right for you. So it's totally fine to continue as you were, taking what you need on the in-breath and releasing on the out-breath. And if it feels right for you in the moment, taking in what you need for you on the in-breath and offering what they need on the out-breath. Taking in strength for you and maybe peace for them. Calm and maybe calm for them. Taking in one for you and one for them. So you're breathing in, you're taking in one for me and one for you. And as you're ready, opening your eyes and closing our practice, looking up. And so it's perfectly fine to just continue to take in what you need. So many of us are in caregiving roles and we're giving so much. And it's so important to remember that we also need to take care of this being right here, right? We deserve care and kindness and compassion. And so we need to be sure we're also taking care of ourselves in that way. So I've shared my email. Please feel free to reach out. My website, my YouTube channel. My YouTube, just to say, it's not curated. It is right here in my little office, practices from my home to yours. And I'm happy to take any questions that anybody might have. And I'm going to stop sharing here. Let's see, there.
Oh, that was so beautiful, Wendy. I got so many good new things, and you got Hans is even sleeping. Even the dog calmed down. So beautiful. I really loved what you said about the kid that was sort of heads down on the desk, and how much you emphasized you can't do this wrong, no judgment. It resonated because I think that happens all the time when kids are struggling. When somebody really makes an effort to connect with that kid and validate that kid, they're getting so many negative messages. Just giving them that one, like, you're doing it all right, like it's okay, can really stay with people forever. And it was touching to hear that. That was really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. And it is really hard for teachers to lean back from wanting to kind of, correct. And,
Yeah.
so I almost like re-remind every time I walk into a class, but to just remember like I keep saying that word in my head, all the work I did, it's an offering. It's just an offering. And particularly right now, people are dealing with so much. However, they can access this practice, and they may barely access it and they may come back to it, right? The sprinkled seed might be there and it might be years later. And that's okay too. Yeah.
Beautiful. Feel free to jump right in if you have a question, anyone, or anything you want to share about how this resonated or worked for you. Or
Wendy, I see you once a month in our meetings, and I try this all the time, and I've done the exercises with you today. I live across the street from a school, so there are kids screaming. There's a guy outside weeding next door. So I get very frustrated that I don't feel like I can get myself there because of my cats are tearing up the house and bothering the dog and, all that external stuff. Is it just practice? Because I kind of throw in the towel every time because I'm like, all right, I'm not going to swear. Forget this. Just because I can't get there.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's such a great point. And to say that there's nowhere to get, right? So we have this sense that that we're trying to get calm. I'm going to get calm, right? And yes, so there's sort of two ways of looking at this. So yes, it can be really helpful and supportive to have an environment that's nice and quiet and peaceful, to start exercising that muscle, to start playing with these practices and start exercising this muscle. And also, whatever arises, like nothing is a distraction for mindfulness. Mindfulness really means being present for whatever's happening. Oh, yep, there's the sound of the grass. There's the screaming children. Can I, sort of take that all? So I remember when I was early in my own practice, I went to a training with this gentleman and he was teaching mindfulness in a high school. It was a private high school. And when he got there, they were showing him where his classroom would be. And they tucked him in this corner around, away from everything. They said, we put you here because it's nice and quiet. And he said, oh no, life is noisy and messy. Put me in the middle of the building, in the midst of it all. And so there's like a happy medium there, right? Because yes, it can be helpful again to kind of exercise that muscle and really get anchored. to have some quiet and to kind of, deepen the practice in that way. And yet life is messy. So there are some practices that are more beneficial to use in a case like that. And so I just am going to throw that out for people. The listening one, right? Those sounds are not intrusive if you're practicing hearing sound, right? So you're sitting, you might start by just feeling your feet on the floor. Yep, here I am, right? So sometimes I'll be like, oh yeah, there you are, Wendy. Okay, right? Here I am, feel my feet on the floor, and then open to sound, right? Sound is arising and passing in the space of your awareness, right? That's all that's happening. And then, right, so that's the sort of riding the wave. And then the diving deeper might be, what's my reactivity to this sound? And that's what I'm hearing, right? There's the, I'm supposed to get somewhere, and there's all this sound that's not how I want it to be. And to start to notice where are all the places in our lives that things are not as we want them to be and how we respond to that. Does this make some sense? So it's a yes and, I guess, yes, it can be helpful to be in a quiet space, and often that's just not feasible and doable. How do we, still have some practice benefit? The practice is available all the time. Mindfulness is always available. We don't need to get anywhere.
Little shift in my own mindset then is what it is. And maybe I'll practice before I get out of bed in the morning when everything is still quiet, and then start with like the day thing. So thank you.
Sure. And I will say it's more challenging as the facilitator when you're all in your own spaces, right? Because I am not privy to the environment. So when I am teaching in a setting and there's a lot of noise, I work that into the practice so that I can help people figure that piece out. That's not often the case, but now on the for our Together for Kids, I'm going to do a listening one because that's a good reminder to me that many people are in noisy environments with lots of what we would call distractions, but in mindfulness, nothing actually really is a distraction. We just want to be mindful of it. So yeah, a little shift in mindset.
During the school year, Wendy, at 8:15, they start coming out for recess. So
Got it. Listening practice for the next time. Thank you.
no, thank you.
Sure thing.
That was a beautiful answer, I thought. Yeah, I loved it. You're not trying to get anywhere, Tara.
Basically says you're not wrong. Like you can't do it wrong. And I don't like to hear that because it's that negative thinking of it always goes wrong. It never goes right. So I must be doing
even more important for you then to work on. You can't get it wrong.
Yeah.
That's it. That's even better. I love that.
There's the self-compassion. And if you're doing a practice with anchoring and the mind wanders, one of the teachers that I really love, Sharon Salzberg, she in one of the earlier practices of hers that I listened to, she kept saying, begin again. We can always begin. And that's a great, like anything we do formally in our sitting practice, right? We can do in our life. And that's really the key, isn't to sit and have a formal practice. The key is really how we then take that into how we live our lives. And so this idea of like self-kindness of, oh yeah, you can't do it wrong. It's just about being there for it. Whatever the messiness is, right? Can I be there for the messiness and I can begin again? So I forget what Kristen Neff calls herself a compassionate mess. Can you be a compassionate mess? Like, can we be like a compassionate mess? Always, always err towards self-compassion when all else fails.
Wendy, somebody asked about dissociation versus mindfulness. Are those like opposite ends, or how would you describe that?
They're different. I don't know if I would, I'm not sure about
binary. We don't need the binaries.
Yeah. So I don't think I would say opposite, but definitely different. So mindfulness is really, so when you're disassociating, if there's disassociation, there's a sense of separateness. Right. So for those who've experienced disassociation, there's this felt sense of disconnect. Mindfulness is actually a sense of really close connection to everything, right? So when we're mindful, we are holding everything within this space, right? And we're able to be with whatever's arising. It feels internally, it's a different felt sense of how to be with experience. Disassociating would be more of that sort of has part of that sort of avoidance component to it, right? Where it's a coping skill. And again, we want to be really kind and gentle with ourselves. When we're mindful, we're not disassociating. We're really mindfulness really gives us clarity. We calm and then we see clearly. So it gives us a little more clarity, and we're able to really touch what's happening in a much different way. We shine a light on it so we see it more clearly. Does that make sense? It's hard to explain because it really is a felt sense,
Yeah.
and you'll feel the difference. If you've experienced disassociation and you practice mindfulness, there will be a very clear felt difference. If you start to notice when you're practicing, which can happen, that you get sort of like, because the calming piece can feel very spacious, but also you can get a little floaty, dreamy, spacey. That, similar to disassociation, is when we need to bring a little energy in, like sit up a little taller. And because what's happening is we've calmed so much that we're really we're no longer present for what's actually happening.
That's helpful to think about too. It made me think about sort of the idea of being detached, and I think it can be hard to understand what the state you're trying to get to with this not being so impacted, but still being aware. And
yes, yeah, and detached is often referred to sort of as the near enemy, right? Because it looks a little like it, so we can get a little confused. And so, yes, it is a practice. And yet, again, I want to caution people of trying to get anywhere, right? So we're not trying to get this state of mindfulness is always here, right? It's always available. We don't have to get anywhere. What we're actually kind of doing is getting rid of all the stuff that's covering it up in some ways. And we're working through some of that. So we want to just be able to sort of ground in presence, and you'll feel a difference between the two. The other piece that people sometimes get wrapped up in is analyzing, right? So when I'm being mindful of something, I'm going to be really mindful of this, and they start analyzing it. And we want to like notice if the mind is getting really busy and we're sort of swirling in thought, right? Then we want to drop back, feel the felt sense. One of the best ways of working with emotions is to feel them in our bodies. So, and I know we didn't get as in depth with that because we want to regulate first. But if we're working with emotions, so one of the things I teach with the monster parade is, how does it feel in your body when the angry monster is visiting, right? The angry monster's in your parade. What does that feel like in your body? What's the angry monster telling you? What might it need from you? Does it need a hug? Like, right? So I'll talk to children about really relating to that. Whereas if we're disassociated or detached from our emotion, we've turned our back. It might be skillful to back up a little bit and see a bigger picture, but we're not turning our back on the emotion, right? We want to be able to say, yeah, angry is here. I see it. And how do I want to relate to it? Does that make some sense? I even have my
great to think about.
Even have my little angry puppet that I use sometimes with kids. Be creative with children. Use lots of props.
Oh no, that's great. I loved the glitter jar. Is that the calming jar?
Yeah, the calming jar. Yeah.
What did you use for that again?
So I just use So I would get a plastic bottle if you're going to have kids actually do it themselves, and water and sparkles. Littler ones are better, and then a little bit of dish soap so that they don't all stick at the top. Can help. Yeah.
Nice.
Mine's kind of turning colors now, and again, visuals are really helpful. When I work with children around feelings, just one more piece around, because I wasn't sure how much time we'd have with questions, but with the monster parade, when I'm talking to children about feelings, I will use tactile objects, right? So we can use little little toys, right? Like little stuffed animals to be different and act it out. Like I said, I made these little puppets. I made them when I was inside during COVID, and I used whatever I had in the house, right? This is my calm one. This is angry. But then to not get too wrapped up in the fun of the making of the things, like what they look like, is not as important as the conversation. What are the things that make angry come into your parade? What do you notice certain things that help angry to come? What are the ways? How do you want to be with the angry feeling? What are some things that might be helpful? I can see that the angry monster's in the parade. What might be helpful? How does it feel in your body? And again, for ourselves, I use this analogy all the time in my own practice. Okay, this is the monster that's in the parade right now. What might be helpful? How do I want to work with it? Does it need a hug, or do I need to get a little further back on the stands and see it at all? Give myself a little space, right? We want to disidentify from the feeling. Different than detach. Yeah.
That's excellent. Other questions? Anybody have anything they want to ask about, or that they loved, or want to try with kids or themselves?
So I saw somebody ask 3 things so just to remember, 3, 2, 1. And you can also, some people do all 5 senses. I just think taste and smell are sometimes harder depending on where you are. So I just focus on the 3 that are most obvious. I want to make it as accessible as possible. So I usually will start with 3 things you see, 2 things you hear, and then 1 sensation. 1 thing you're touching. So it could be your own body touching. You're self-seated or something like that. And those are practices. That's actually a lot of therapeutic environments use that model. And in particular, we were talking about disassociation. That is one that is often used. Feet on the floor, look, what do you see? Name them. Name the things you see in the room. Can be really helpful.
That was a helpful reminder, that grounding sort of when you're dissociated, you want to come back. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you shared your book with people and your YouTube channel. I know people will want to follow up and get that book. It's so helpful that you're doing this in so many different spaces for different audiences. And it was so accessible with sort of the images you used and the stories you told. I could probably use a lot of that stuff. So I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
It's totally my pleasure. And like I said, feel free to reach out if anybody has any questions about other practices. I'm happy to share.
People are all like, we're going to go see the YouTube. We're going to go get the book. So again, thank you so much, Wendy. We're so grateful. And I'm sure everyone here got so much, and will, share that recording out with people so you can return to it and kind of think more about it and have it whenever you need it.
That sounds great. So and I'm always adding things to the YouTube, and I am cleaning up the children's ones I did early in COVID, and I didn't have very good lighting, so I apologize. But you'll get the idea. And I am cleaning some of those up, but at least it gives people, I felt like it was hard to explain without seeing it, so at least it gives people something to work with. So
are there classes you teach too, did you say? Because I know you kind of were talking about 6-week series, and people might be interested in that.
Yeah, so I do. And people can check my website. I try and keep it current in terms of what's offered publicly, mostly like schools or nonprofits contract with me to go in and do programming for them. But I also do offer some things more open to the public. I did a class on happiness for adults in the past through a library. I'm doing, I'm trying to hold off and see if I can start to offer things in person again. So I haven't added anything new, but I'm really hoping to start offering. I do a 6-week course on mindfulness. I do a certification for teaching mindfulness to children. So those are a couple things that I might be offering down the road. And I am going to be at Tide Pool Bookstore on Saturday, signing and reading my book if they have books. And I'm always happy to sign if people can track me down. I'm always happy to do that too.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
We'll call it a day. Good, pretty close to time. So thank you for 2 hours of mindful practices. That's amazing.
It's totally my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was good to see you all. Thank you for all your attention and for practicing and playing with me today.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.